The limits of what is possible in BeamNG. In this video, I will be putting these limits to the test, working towards making an Eldritch abomination all the way to breaking the game's rendering engine. I'll be going over how these are done and what exactly is happening behind the scenes. Chapter 1. Modifying car values. How did I manage to make an Eldritch abomination in BeamNG? It all started with Agent Y's Car Values Scale mod. This mod allows you to change values in the physics of the car, such as stiffness, braking resistance, and friction. Step 1 of reaching the abomination was changing the values, starting with the stiffness. This is, at default, set to a scale of 1. Modifying to a value of 0.2, we can see the effects it has on the truck. The first noticeable thing is the suspension, which brings the vehicle closer to the ground. The second thing we notice is when under heavy acceleration and turning, the frame, chassis, and vehicle parts start to wiggle and vibrate more violently than they regularly would. One thing that is interesting to note is that when decreasing the stiffness, there is no damage done to the vehicle yet under regular operation. Another intriguing observation is that the crash damage is similar to that of the truck with regular stiffness. Now bringing this value down to 0.01, the vehicle turns into a jelly-like substance. The car is absolutely slammed to the ground, and driving is still somewhat possible at snail-like speeds. Upon increasing the throttle input, the drive shaft breaks, and the front wheels start to become unstable, shaking violently till they fall apart. Dropping the stiffness to its absolute limit, the car becomes a liquid. Rexy on the dash is no longer having a fun time. And accelerating is no longer a viable option to move any reasonable distance. In fact, merely putting the vehicle into drive is a mistake. Upon trying to accelerate, the truck starts to have a popcorn-like effect, with pieces flying in the sky as the vehicle expands. We are one step closer to the Eldritch. Now, on to braking resistance. Changing this value to 0.2, there isn't much to notice visually, and the vehicle still drives under normal operating conditions. The rear drive shaft brakes when pushing the vehicle with a neutral dump, leaving us with a Carolina squatted truck. Upon crashing the vehicle, compared to the non-modified one, we notice that turning down the braking resistance causes the car pieces of the truck to fly off with ease. Dropping the value to its minimum, the car breaks into all possible pieces it can. Now on to friction. Decreasing the overall friction value to 0.2 turns this D series into the drift series it's always wanted to be, with the only thing holding it back being the radiator. Moving on to a value of 0.001, the truck surprisingly still handles swell. A bit slidey, but not impossible to drive. What about decreasing the tire sliding friction too? This value is also available, so I see no reason not to use it. Setting this to a value of 0 leaves us powerless while sliding down a hill. Accelerating or decelerating has no effect. Like a pinball in a machine, we go sliding across the ground, with each hit sending us in a different direction. with an endless screech emanating from the tires on the pavement until we hit dirt or finally come to a stop. Now, what if there was negative friction? Changing the tire sliding or the overall friction to negative values has an effect I never would have expected. Changing the sliding tire friction to -1, everything seems dandy, till we lose traction, whether it's by heavy acceleration or by engaging ABS. Heavy acceleration will cause the tires to lose grip and then spin hundreds of miles per hour, immediately blowing the engine and sending the vehicle flying in the opposite direction. Engaging ABS, on the other hand, sends you into an uncontrollable power slide towards the direction you are heading. If done correctly, initiating a drift sends the tires off the vehicle like blades with infinite power. This got me thinking, what if I used the node grabber to spin the truck like a blade? This creates a fascinating spectacle as the wheels fly off, and the vehicle tears itself apart till it's merely just the frame left. Bringing the tire slide friction back to normal and decreasing the overall friction to -4 seems to do nothing initially. A trend among changing these values. Upon trying to drift, or simply moving too much, the vehicle pulls itself apart vigorously. Parts fly left and right as the vehicle becomes an unstable shaking frame. Turning the value to a -10 gives an intensified version of this, with the vehicle immediately exploding. Increasing both friction values to their max isn't as exciting, but it still has some expected effects. The tires stick to the ground a lot better, and the truck does not slide on any material. It stays planted as if it were on Velcro. Now, the moment you may have been waiting for, or hoping would never happen. The abomination. Creating this took time. Like a crazy scientist in a lab, I experimented with no mercy, changing the values willy-nilly till I created a monster. Here is that monster. This is the Eldritch D-Series. When spawned in, my computer struggles, getting a mere 15 FPS max. The truck slowly increases in size while each part is trying to tear itself out of the physical plane of existence. Upon the vehicle completing the expansion, the game lags less, and parts start to crawl away from the abomination that just birthed them. Certain parts have an uncanny alive feel to them, like watching a creature trying to escape its confines. This combination of values was entertaining to make, and if you would like to try it out yourself, there will be a link in the description for Agent Y's car values scale mod. Creating these videos is no easy feat, from the research, script writing, editing, and much more. If you enjoyed this video and would like to support the production of more videos like this in the future, please consider subscribing, hitting the like button, and the bell icon. Now, let's get back to it. To understand how Agent Y's mod works, and why these effects happen, let me give you a rundown on how BeamNG soft body physics work. BeamNG uses nodes and beams. Nodes interconnect with different beams to create the structure of the vehicle. Nodes can have different weights, materials, friction, and collision. Beams, on the other hand, are the connection between nodes and have various types, as well as modifiers/arguments. There are many different arguments for beams, important ones like beam spring, beam damp, beam strength, and beam deform. So, why does decreasing the stiffness cause the vehicle to turn into a liquid? This is due to the beam spring value being multiplied by the new set value. Beam spring, which can also be thought of as the stiffness, is the force required in Newton meters to change the length of a beam by a set amount. For example, when I changed the stiffness value to 0.001, the game multiplied that by its original value, let's say 100 Newton meters, and got a value of 1 Newton meter, now only allowing the beams to withstand 1 Newton meter of force, causing the car to collapse in and on itself. Braking resistance follows a similar story. Beam strength is the amount of force in newtons that a beam can resist before braking. This value defaults to FLT max, which prevents the beam from breaking. On the other hand, for things like hinges, bumpers, rear view mirrors, and more, this value is modified to anything else besides FLT max to let the parts fall off. Modifying the values that aren't set to FLT max allowed the vehicle parts to fly off effortlessly during the collision earlier. Now on to friction, which is handled by the nodes instead of the beams. Each node has a friction coefficient value at a default of 1. Modifying this value had expected results: increased sliding, less friction, and with everything almost turning into Velcro with more friction. But what about the negative friction? Why did it cause the tires to start spinning hundreds of miles per hour and the vehicle body to explode? My theory is the following. Quick disclaimer: the following information is heavily simplified and may contain errors. I'll be showing you only 2 different states of friction on a tire. The 2 states are known as acceleration friction and braking friction. These are responsible for letting the tires either pull the vehicle forward or to bring the vehicle to a stop. During acceleration, the friction force from the ground is opposing the direction the tire is traveling, allowing the tires to pull the vehicle forward by using the opposing force. For example, we decrease the tire sliding friction. Now the force that was opposing the tire in the direction it's traveling is less, which means it doesn't have as much opposing force to grab onto, causing the wheel to slip and lose traction a lot easier. Braking friction's direction of force is the opposite of acceleration friction. This friction force allows the tires to pull the vehicle to a stop. This is because, during braking, the friction on the tires is opposing the direction of travel, thereby letting the tires grab onto the road and slow the vehicle down. To illustrate, the vehicle is traveling with a regular friction value and is braking. The brake calipers and rotors start to slow the tires down by using a braking force that opposes the movement of the tires. This force from the caliper is transmitted to the surface of the tire, which then starts to push against the friction, allowing the vehicle to slow down. We now know, in regular circumstances, that friction resists the motion between the tire and the surface it contacts. Now what about when we set friction to a negative value? The negative friction effectively inverts the force that's supposed to oppose sliding. Therefore, if we set the friction to a negative value, now it's no longer opposing the rotation of the tires, but rather accelerating the rotation of the tires, causing the wheels to spin at exponentially high speeds during rapid acceleration and braking. This still doesn't explain modifying the overall friction to a negative value. Why does the car experience an unscheduled rapid disassembly? At high negative values, the nodes and beams start to experience forces that pull them apart. I assume this is because regular friction values would cause the nodes to resist sliding against each other. So when turning these values to a negative, everywhere the vehicle slid against itself, rather than having a force resisting the sliding, it would have a bunch of force accelerating the sliding, similar to that of the effect with negative tire friction, thereby causing everything to explode outward. Chapter 2: Modifying Motion Blur. I was watching Ant Venom's I Broke Every Minecraft Setting video and was inspired to dig into whether or not this was possible in BeamNG. Ant Venom broke the settings in Minecraft by modifying the options.txt file. I searched through the game files, finding many leads, until I eventually stumbled upon the settings.json file in BeamNG's user folder. This is where the real hunt started. I changed values left and right, trying to find something interesting, until I did. One of BeamNG's more recently added features, motion blur. Usually the max this value can be set to is 0.5. Given the option to adjust it to anything, I started my testing. Changing the post-FX motion blur strength to a value of 1, a significant amount of extra blur, this could still be playable for some people. It could even be used for certain cinematic shots, although nothing compared to what is to come. Warning: past this point, you may be nauseated if you are sensitive to high motion blur. Proceed with caution. Level 2, a value of 5. This step up is slightly nauseating, although still bearable. Driving is significantly more difficult, and the motion blur is greatly exaggerated. Level 3, a value of 25. This makes driving fast and accurately nearly impossible. Everything in motion becomes a mere blur on the screen. There also appears to be a tunnel vision effect due to the extreme blur on the screen. This tunnel vision seems to follow the direction in which the vehicle is being turned. Level 4, a value of 500. This level is where things start to get very interesting. Just the vibrations of the engine starting kick off the motion blur on the vehicle. Moving is another story. Once in motion, everything appears to ghost heavily, as if there's a see-through smear filter of what's happening on screen. Level 5, a value of 10,000. This increase in value starts to break the motion blur system even more. With increased visual artifacts, movement causes the ghosting of shapes on the screen, almost as if the four corners of the screen were being divided. Another intriguing effect is that when the camera is stopped from moving, the ghosting fades into the vehicle and scenery. Moving left or right with the free cam causes a static effect, similar to that of a TV with no signal. The motion blur around vehicles starts to vibrate intensely. Level 6, the final level, at a motion blur value of 1 trillion. I didn't think the game would work after changing it to a value this high. Visual artifacts on vehicles are quite the spectacle, with an incredible mosaic look. Windy grass also has a compelling look to it, with a static noise and glitched appearance. Moving back and forth with the free cam makes the subdivisions of the screen more visible. And left to right has a similar static effect to earlier, but is more blotchy and disconnected. Lights on vehicle have an intriguing look to them as well, almost as if you can see through the bloom effect, producing a striking glow. Values any higher than 1 trillion and the effects seem to dissipate, and values in the negative sadly do nothing interesting. So, what causes the crazy motion blur effects in BeamNG at extremely high values? Now, this is all new to me. Upon doing my research, I was able to conclude why this phenomenon might happen. Motion blur in games is done by two methods: camera motion blur or object motion blur. Beam uses object motion blur, which happens when objects move or rotate relative to the camera. Then the game creates a blur trail only on those objects depending on their speed. For example, if you're driving a car down the highway in Beam, the highway around you is blurred, but the car isn't, even though it's moving at a fast rate of speed. So increasing the motion blur value to 1 through 500 dramatically increases the trails behind moving objects. But what about the visual bugs that start happening between values of 10,000 to 1 trillion? My leading theory is that the graphical engine's calculations begin to break down at that point, similar to the visual bugs in my Farlands video, which you should check out if you haven't. With the game developers never intending for this value to be set so high, they never needed to test or fix these phenomena. I wish I had a better explanation for this. Finding out exactly why these effects are happening stumps me the most out of everything I cover in this video. If you have any theories or know a bit more about motion blur implementation in video games than I do, please leave a comment. Chapter 3: Modifying Light. On a day like any other, I decided to hop on BeamNG. Tired of driving around endlessly with no rhyme or reason, I remembered about the F11 editor. For those who have never used it, the F11 editor is a lovely contraption by the BeamNG developers that allows users to create and modify maps. Upon opening the F11 menu and modifying the sun sky object, nothing could quite prepare me for the rabbit hole this would eventually lead me down, learning why the sky is blue and why the clouds are white. This was all because of the discovery of two settings, Rayleigh and Mie scattering. At first, I thought these sounded like some made-up equations for some silly physics sandbox, but as I soon discovered, they actually have meaning in the real world. But who cares about that yet? Let us see what fun playing around with these values will get us. Now, the truth is, I've played around with these values before, and many regular numbers can break them, so for the sake of starting small and escalating as we go, I'll be changing the starting value of Rayleigh scattering from 0.004 to 0.05. The sky appears to change to a more orange hue. The ground and objects around also start to be affected by the tint change of the sky, with everything appearing more orange than before. Altering this value to 0.1, the sky's orange intensifies, and the edges of the sky are almost blood red. Increasing the value to 0.2 escalates this effect further. The world now looks eerily orange-red, nearly looking like a Halloween-themed update to the lighting engine. At a value of 0.3, the objects and world around them turn red. The sky is enveloped in darkness, and the clouds start to take on a red tint, something almost out of a horror movie. Increasing this value to 1, the world becomes a gray monochrome color scheme. Headlights act as a view into the world of color that was left behind. When panning the camera towards the sun, you are engulfed almost entirely in red light. At values above 1.3, strange visual artifacts appear, and the screen sometimes gets completely enveloped in darkness. What about values in the negative? At extremely low negative values, things start to get even more interesting. Changing the Rayleigh scattering to negative 0.0001, the world appears blue and yellow. When panning the camera, certain materials begin to shift between yellow and blue, producing a pretty visual effect. The sky is dark blue, and the sun is an intense yellow. Adjusting this value to negative 0.00001, everything appears to darken. Additionally, a purple hue starts to be visible. On top of that, the sun begins to have a really bright light blue color, similar to that of a neutron star. Now, what about Mie scattering? At an initial value of 0.001, the sky appears normal. Upon modifying the value to 0.5, everything appears to become darker. Increasing this value to 1, the sky and environment darkens even more, with a trend heading towards total darkness. A value of 5 puts us into a world barren of color, and surrounded by darkness and shadows that seem to lead into an abyss of nothingness. Inputting a Mie scattering value of 10, we start to notice visual artifacts. Black sometimes completely covers the screen, and at certain angles, you can see pixelated visual artifacts similar to those seen with high Rayleigh scattering values. You can also go into the negatives, causing the ground and objects to be completely black, but having the sky to be a bright white with black clouds. So, why do changing the Mie and Rayleigh scattering values cause these strange lighting effects? In order to answer that, I looked into what these are and learned how they affect light. Light scatters in the atmosphere in 3 different ways: Mie, Rayleigh, and non-selective scattering. We don't have to worry about non-selective, as it's not anywhere in the F11 editor. So what about Mie and Rayleigh? Let's go over Rayleigh scattering first. Rayleigh is the scattering of light that is most common in the atmosphere. It is named after Lord Rayleigh, a 19th century British physicist. Lord Rayleigh was the first to investigate and explain this molecular phenomenon. Rayleigh scattering is responsible for the blue color of the sky. When smaller wavelengths of light from the sun make it to Earth, most of it scatters off air particles less than 50 nanometers in size that are in the atmosphere, like oxygen, nitrogen, and argon. Air molecules scatter more blue light due to blue being a short wavelength of light. Blue light gets scattered more in the atmosphere, while other larger wavelengths of light like green, red, yellow, and orange make it through without being scattered in the sky as much. All of this is why if you are lower in the atmosphere, where particles are more dense, the sky is more blue. And if you're higher up in the atmosphere, where there are fewer particles, the sky is more transparent, and you see more of the void of space. But some may wonder, if purple has such a shorter wavelength, why isn't the sky purple? This is due to how much purple light the sun emits, which isn't nearly as much as blue, and due to our eyes being more sensitive to blue light than purple. Considering all that, why does changing the Rayleigh value in BeamNG cause the sky to go orange and red? I assume that adjusting this value changes the wavelength and intensity of the scattered light. Higher values amplify the scattering of longer wavelengths like red and orange, which causes BeamNG to have a more orange and red appearance. What about the negative values? Why is there more blue, purple, and yellow present? Perhaps the effect is working in reverse, with shorter wavelengths like blue and purple becoming more prominent. As for yellow, a longer wavelength, I'm not entirely sure. If you have any theories about this, feel free to leave a comment below. Now, onto Mie scattering, which is another common effect on light waves due to particle size. Mie is the scattering of light that is responsible for the white color of clouds, fog, and haze due to the even spreading of light. It is named after Gustav Adolf Fedor Wilhelm Ludwig Mie, a 20th century German physicist. Mie was the first to theorize and explain this molecular phenomenon. Mie scattering occurs when the particles causing the scattering, such as water vapor, dust, and smoke, are about 50 to 50,000 nanometers. This causes the light to be spread evenly in different directions. Mie scattering generally happens in the lower atmosphere, where larger particles are more abundant, like water vapor from clouds. This makes Mie scattering more present during overcast or cloudy conditions. The water droplets or ice crystals that start to form clouds typically range from 50 nanometers to larger droplets reaching up to 50,000 nanometers in diameter. Because the particles and droplets in a regular cloud fall into this range, Mie scattering occurs, causing the white color of clouds. And the larger the droplets, the less scattering that takes place, causing storm clouds' dark, intimidating look. Storm clouds typically have droplet sizes from 50,000 nanometers to 2 million nanometers, drastically decreasing the amount of scattering. Therefore, increasing the Mie scattering value should change the scattering effect of larger particles or how much light is evenly distributed throughout the atmosphere. This seems to be the case, although not entirely. With increasing this value, everything exponentially becomes darker and has less color. Although one would expect things to be brighter if there is more Mie scattering. So why does this happen? This is most likely due to the implementation of Mie scattering, since calculating so many individual light waves and particles in a game dedicated to vehicle physics would cause a significant performance hit. There are likely many shortcuts to achieve the Mie scattering effect, and it's possible that increasing this value simply decreases the overall scattering in the sky, while also somehow removing the colors. I am not a scientist or a game developer, merely a BeamNG YouTuber. I did all this research for the video, so if you know more about this than I do, or have any theories and are willing to leave a comment, I would love to hear your ideas.
I've been trying to reach you, but I can't help myself. But what is this creature? It is literally alive. It is moving. It is migrating to a different location. This is not normal. This is not right. Oh, I see. It's a water creature. That's where it's going. Yes. Yummy.
I figured, what would more gravity do to the situation if there wasn't already so much gravity? I increased it, and it's a boiling pile of D-series. It's dancing around, living its own life, doing its own thing. Yeah.
I've been trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty. The birds are majestic this time of year. Just look at them fly away so peacefully and gracefully. There, it's almost gone. There, goodness.
And until next time, stay beautiful, fellow Beamers.